Hello, welcome to the Madness in Meeting podcast. As we normally do, we had a topic planned for today's episode. It was going to be just all around navigating life transitions from job changes to moving to breakups, et cetera, everything in between. And I still want to talk about that topic because I think it could be a really interesting conversation of just talking about our experience with those things and how we navigated them and how we would help someone else navigate those things now. But we just ended up talking for the last hour before recording this podcast episode, just about life and stuff and everything. And we decided that there was another episode topic that felt more alive and relevant for today. And it came about when we were both discussing this roadblock that a lot of people might come up against, especially in regards to, like, this is what I notice a lot of the time in regards to people who have some kind of body image struggle and really struggle with their relationship with their body, with themselves and food. There's a lot of resistance and fear around opening up about those things because it feels really unsafe and vulnerable to do so. There's a lot of inherent shame that is intertwined into just blatantly struggling with those things to the point where it's really hard for someone to put up their hand and say, I really struggle with those things. And that led us into identifying that being self-compassionate and self-forgiveness in general is really effing hard for a lot of people. And this is something that comes up a lot inside of my work with clients that I didn't really realize until Amanda pointed it out in our conversation. But compassionate self-forgiveness, learning how to be compassionate with yourself and to forgive yourself is such a huge part of any process. Whenever you're moving towards any kind of change, healing, growing, any kind of goal, that's going to be a really relevant part of the process. Yet it's where most people feel the most stuck and they experience the most amount of resistance to that work. Whenever I try to introduce that stuff to a new client that I'm working with, their initial immediate reaction is just like, this breathing and feeling so uncomfortable. And like they're trying to say and do what I'm asking them to do to practice forgiving themselves, to practice self-compassion, but doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. There's something about it that feels really wrong. And Amanda even said in her own experience that that was how she experienced it in the very beginning too. Yeah.
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 And so I think it could be a really interesting conversation to explore, like, what is going on here? Like, why is self-compassion, self-forgiveness, being kind to ourselves so massively uncomfortable?
Can we start with a conversation around what we mean by compassionate self-forgiveness, what that is, and why it's important, and what it looks like to move through something like that?
Hmm.
Coming from, I would love to hear you dive into that as someone that uses this inside of your work religiously.
Yeah. Well, it's a stark contrast to the way that we typically approach change in any way. Usually, when we identify something in ourselves or something in our lives that we don't like and that we want to change, we we use that resistance or that hatred towards that thing as fuel to try to change it. Like, I'm not okay with this. I'm uncomfortable with this. I hate that this is here. So I'm going to try to change it and with that urgency of I need to escape this discomfort that I feel and realizing I don't like this thing. And when we do that, when we are in resistance or judgment of something or a part of ourselves, it actually just creates a lot more resistance. When we're judging something, we're pouring a lot of our energy into it. And we're going to be really focused on that urgency to escape that discomfort that we're not okay with, which is going to block off our creativity. It's going to create a lot of stagnancy. It's going to make us feel really like fight or flighty in a way. We're not going to be able to see opportunities or to have insights that are going to support us in moving forward towards a different outcome in a much more sustainable way. And that's why this work is so important around learning acceptance, learning self-compassion, learning how to forgive ourselves. Because, as a very blatant example, if someone is really wanting to overcome being really hard on themselves, we can weave in body image stuff. Someone has a really poor relationship with themselves, with their body. They are constantly criticizing themselves, and that's something that they want to escape. They are really aware of the fact that that's having a really negative impact on their life, and so they want to change it. But if they try to change being really hard and self-critical on themselves by then being hard and critical on themselves over the fact that they're being hard and critical of themselves, then we're just doing the same thing. We're staying stuck in a loop. We're judging the fact that we're judging. We're feeling shame over the fact that we're shaming ourselves, and we're criticizing ourselves for criticizing ourselves. So it's just going to get really messy, and we're not really going to feel like we're going anywhere. And so part of the self-compassion and the self-forgiveness work comes from creating a relationship with yourself, these thoughts, these feelings, these parts of you that are self-critical, that get really down on yourself, where you can see them as innocent, where you can see these parts of you as something that's trying to benefit you in some way, shape, or form. Because if you can see that these patterns of thought or these ways of being in your life aren't bad, they're not wrong, they might be causing negative consequences, but you're not bad or wrong because you have them, then it's going to be so much easier for you to actually move forward through creating a different relationship with those thoughts and feelings. You're not going to feel so stuck to them. You're not going to feel like a victim to them. You're going to be able to navigate your way past them a lot more easily.
I used to use self-loathing as fuel for everything. And I specifically remember in my powerlifting day in my dancing days, so this is going back to now when I was 10, 12 years old, where I would pick a pick apart every aspect of my technique or who I believed I was, and I would turn on loud music and I would say nasty things to myself to amp myself up to go lift.
Mhm.
And it never really had the impact that I wanted it to. I never became necessarily a better dancer as a byproduct of my hateful thoughts. I practiced more because I told myself how terrible I was all the time. And it was through the practice that I became, technically speaking, a better dancer, but I never felt better. And I go back and I watch footage of myself in competition or dancing, and I go back and I really reflect on my years lifting, and I wonder, like, what was I missing? Like, what did I see that I don't see now? Because what I see is a really talented individual who never felt that way inside of herself.
Mhm.
And when I started working with Kelly, and she had me going through this process of compassionate self-forgiveness, where she had me forgiving myself for believing in certain thoughts and or for allowing myself to engage in certain disempowering patterns, I really felt uncomfortable with that. And I really did not want to do it. I didn't put up a fight, but I remember thinking to myself, this is massively uncomfortable. I don't believe what I'm saying to myself. And over time, as I began to actually be more compassionate and actually forgive myself for thinking certain thoughts and behaving in certain ways, my whole world opened up, where I never allowed myself to make certain choices before because I didn't think that they were going to lead to the outcome that I wanted. I didn't feel worthy of going that route. I was so concerned about the way I looked to other people, how other people were going to respond to me, how successful I was going to be, how much impact that decision was going to have, that it kept me very locked inside of a narrow range of operating. And it wasn't until I relaxed and softened into more compassion for who I am that all of these new avenues started to open up for me. And I do think that some people look at me now and wonder how I've become who I am today and how I'm able to access the insight that I have. And it's not coming from me, it's coming through me. And that's how. And I tell them it's through love and loving who I am. And there's some sort of disconnect there. And I noticed that this weekend where I was having like a friendly debate with my dad, and he just said, I don't think that it's possible for the human brain to fully embrace who we are. Like that's just not built into our DNA. So there's this major resistance that we have inside of self-acceptance, unconditional self-acceptance, or the ability to forgive who we are, even though it's the path that we're all being guided down.
Mhm.
And it's all what we're actually seeking underneath it all is to feel good inside of who we are.
That's right. Yeah. And I think a lot of that, the mechanism behind our resistance to that is coming from the fact that resisting who we are, judging ourselves, being really hard on ourselves, has in some way, shape, or form been a very effective strategy at getting us something in our lives. In some way, effective enough that we've held on to it. We've seen it as something that gets us some kind of predictable result. And like you were talking about with your experience of being a dancer and being really hard on yourself and having that whole routine around being hard on yourself, you can look back on it and see that it didn't make you feel any better about yourself, which is ultimately what you were looking for. You wanted to dance better and be more successful so that you could feel better about yourself. But even though it didn't necessarily work in that regard, it did get you to show up. It did get you to work harder. It did work you to work more on it. And that was justifiable enough to the mind to go, see, this is effective. This is working. I'm working towards what I want by being hard on myself. And this is a strategy I think we learned very young. Like even our parents, our teachers, our caregivers, our authorities in any way would probably use that same strategy to motivate us to do what it is that they wanted us to do. They would criticize us or make us feel down or bad or scared or worried about a future outcome to motivate us doing the thing that they wanted us to do, whether it was to get better grades or to do the chores or to do your homework or whatever it is, there was always an aspect of, I'm going to use self-criticism and fear as fuel to get you to do what it is that I want you to do. And then we adopt that same strategy. If I want myself to do something, if I want myself to go to the gym every day, if I want myself to say no to the cake and eat a salad for lunch, if I want myself to work on building the business or whatever it is, then I need to beat myself up if I don't do it. Because if I beat myself up and I make myself feel really bad about it, then I'm going to feel more motivated to do it. And in some ways, that has been effective. That's definitely a strategy I relied on a lot in my life, especially near the beginning of like me getting into fitness and initially losing a lot of weight. And it was my incessant criticism of myself and my body and who I was and how I wasn't good enough that fueled me showing up for those workouts when I didn't want to and fueled me eating the thing that I didn't want to eat and not eating the thing that I did want to eat, et cetera, et cetera. And so I continued getting evidence that it was an effective strategy. But the lack of efficacy of it really does come down to, is it actually bringing us closer to where we want to be at the end of all of this? Not just some tangible result of I went to the gym and lost weight, or I did a bunch of extra dance practices and finally honed in on this skill or whatever, but is it actually bringing me closer to how I want to experience myself, how I want to experience my life, and how I want to feel in all of it? And the answer is never yes in that case.
I think it is in a way where
Yeah,
it's giving you information and you're learning something from it. And we're constantly evolving inside of a lifetime. And I think if you're a listener of this podcast, it's important for you to continue evolving and to continue your transformation throughout your lifetime and expand into new horizons. And so you're always going to be butting up against the ceiling, the energetic ceiling that you've created for yourself inside of your mode of operatum, operandus, your
never heard either of those words.
the way you've been operating up until now. And if you want to continue to move in a direction and expand into um, like a more elevated version of who you are, who's capable of new things, who is can invite and receive in new insight, and who wants to show up in their lives in a new way, you have to first identify what's not working and a new way of operating that might be able to take you in a new direction. And anytime you're met with a new path that you've never walked down before, there's a lot of uncertainty inside of it, and it's going to feel massively uncomfortable because you're going to need to be with yourself in a new way. And so it worked in a way because it got you to this point. But now you're ready for change. You're ready for something new, and you can't move forward in a new way until you embrace a new way of showing up for yourself. And I think the discomfort inside of showing yourself forgiveness and compassion where you couldn't before is normal. And it's something to be
Mhm.
normalized, that it's not going to feel good at first. It's going to feel wrong
Like
because
you're
you've been,
lying to yourself.
yes. And at first, you might be.
Mhm.
You might
Yes,
have
thank
to
you for
go,
saying that.
yeah. You might have to go through the motions of saying the words, I forgive myself. Can I just say how uncomfortable that was for me at the start?
Hmm.
Just to say those few words, I forgive myself for blank, I forgive myself. Just that part of the sentence. I was like, oh my God, no, I don't. I don't want
Hmm.
to forgive myself. And I forced myself to say it anyway. And over time, the discomfort of that sentence is not silly. They're
Hmm.
just words, but the discomfort of the meaning behind that sentence shifted for me, and it became easier to stomach it because at first it felt like I was forcing it down when I didn't want to.
Hmm.
And I think it's really important to normalize that. Um, and over time, it gets easier and it becomes more comfortable and more truthful. You start
Hmm.
to find evidence that it's not threatening to forgive who you are.
And it does feel threatening at
Yeah.
first. And my experience of it feeling threatening is it just feels like if I forgive myself and someone else hasn't forgiven me or doesn't think I deserve to be forgiven for that, and this is like a very general like way of thinking about it, but it's like I don't want to be wrong on that. I don't want to give myself more grace or more love or more compassion or more forgiveness than the outside world has determined I'm worthy of. I always want to give myself the least. And I think that we do that a lot. We give ourselves the least amount of praise. We give ourselves the least amount of love. We give ourselves the least amount of compassion and forgiveness because we don't want to be put in a position where someone else is looking at us thinking that we are arrogant or full of ourselves or that like we don't deserve that. And we've brought this up in other conversations before too, around like, I don't want to be confident because if someone else sees me being confident and thinks like, oh, like, why is she so confident because of XYZ and whatever, that would hurt if we knew that someone else was perceiving us in that way. And so I think we're always trying to skim at the bottom of what we're worthy of or what we think other people might believe that we're worthy of, because forgiving ourselves for something that someone else might think that we're not worthy of being forgiven for feels really threatening.
I also want to throw this out there. Like, what are you actually forgiving? You're forgiving a thought that you had about who you believe you are. It's just a thought. I'll give an example. Something I used to say to myself is, you're not naturally talented, so you have to work really hard. Like you're being such a lazy son of a bee. Just get up off your butt and work because you don't have what it naturally takes to be better than from whatever this version of you that you're seeing in the mirror. So make something of yourself, otherwise you'll never feel good. So what I like that sentence that I just threw out there, it's a thought. It's a thought that I developed about who I believed I was and what I believed was true about me over time. And when I'm forgiving myself for believing that thought. Ultimately, our thoughts, and we've discussed this in previous episodes, what is a thought? It's just an energetic release that the brain needs to expel when there's excess energy that it needs to process and get rid of. Just like every organ in our body is constantly releasing energy, we're, we're releasing energy via heat. The brain does that through thought. And the thought is just mimicking the energy that you're holding inside of you. And the thoughts that are there, a byproduct of thoughts and belief systems that you've inherited throughout your life based on personal experiences, based on the people that you surrounded yourself with. And eventually you begin to buy into some of them and disregard others. And the ones that you buy into formulate your worldview and the perspective that you hold inside of who you believe yourself to be. But we are always who we believe ourselves to be. We are not any one thing. Your belief systems about you are your entire reality, and you can change them anytime you want to. But in order to do that, you have to, one, question the validity of them, finding evidence of the opposite, and forgiving yourself for innocently buying into something that you thought was true and that might not be, or are
Mhm.
no longer true for you anymore. And you're just giving yourself permission to compassionately let it go rather than further blaming yourself, shaming yourself, and judging yourself for another thing, for believing
Mhm.
in something else, right? Exacerbating that pattern. And so when you can see that you are just gently forgiving a minor misunderstanding about who you are, then it becomes easier to adopt a new one. And from there, literally recreate the very nature of who you are.
Mhm. And that process of letting go of disempowering beliefs about who we are can feel sometimes ineffective in the same way that just trying to repeat positive affirmations does, because it feels like we talked about earlier, a convenient lie that we're trying to tell ourselves. And that process I've seen happen a lot of the time is, as an example, someone identifies that they have a belief that they're not worthy or they're not good enough or whatever. And they see that holding on to that belief is not helping them. It's holding them back. It has consequences. And so they might practice trying to change that belief, even through self-compassion and forgiveness. Like, I forgive myself for believing that I'm not good enough. I forgive myself for believing that I'm not worthy. The truth is, I'm worthy, or the truth is I'm good enough. And it's like, okay, like I said the words, but it's not resonating in a way. And this is when I think it's so important to just, one, get really honest about what's true for you. And also just be creative with ways that you try on different perspectives that are going to feel like a step up from the previous perspective of I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. And that can look like or sound like I forgive myself for believing that I'm not good enough. The truth is, I understand where that belief came from. I understand all of the evidence that I've found from my life or from my recent past that has shown me that I might not be good enough or that it might not be worth trying or that I might fail, et cetera, et cetera. And that I'm really just trying to prevent more pain in the future of having failed or having more evidence that I'm not good enough by not even trying. And it makes perfect sense to me why I would justify to myself not even trying if trying is associated with more pain. But I also know that if I never give myself continuous opportunities to prove that I am good enough, that I can be successful, that I am worthy of having what I want, then I'm also never going to find that evidence either. And if I never find that evidence, then life is pretty much as good as it's ever going to get.
Thank you so much for saying that. There is a bridge that takes time to build here, where if you're not feeling worthy of something, just to take this example, and you can forgive yourself for recognizing this feeling, this belief system about you. But if you try to convince yourself that you are worthy and you forgive yourself for not believing you're worthy, but you don't really feel worthy yet, then trying to lie to yourself in that regard is not necessarily going to feel good. So rather than moving from, I forgive myself for believing I'm not worthy, I'm worthy, you can try something on in the middle. I forgive myself for believing I'm not worthy, but I'm learning how to feel worthy inside of who I am. I'm going to take my time to learn to embrace parts of myself where I do feel worthy, or learn to feel more compassion to myself when I don't feel worthy. And over time, that worthiness feeling will begin to grow as you gradually give yourself an inch every time you do an exercise like this. So it kind of comes over time, and you're not going to be able to flip that switch right away.
That's right. Yeah, and it comes with just trying it on and really being committed to finding out what is something that is true that feels like an upgrade to that previous thing that felt true. That I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm ugly, or I'll never be loved, or there's something wrong with me. Those really core stories that we all hold on to, that when we realize we're holding on to them, we're like, I shouldn't be holding on to those. Because we see the negative consequences of them. We see that it's not helpful to be believing in those things. And also the self-love positivity world, the spiritual self-help world has taught us that we're supposed to love ourselves and we're supposed to not tell ourselves things like that, which further perpetuates that we're doing something wrong and creates this relationship with ourselves and our thoughts where we're just at war with them. But if we can, instead of approaching this change that we want to how we see ourselves and how we feel within ourselves, when we don't approach it from this place of, this is wrong, I need to stop saying this, I need to stop believing this, and I need to try to throw out that belief and adopt a new one, the bridge, like you said, is really when we can find that understanding, that compassionate understanding of why these thoughts are here, how they came about, what I've gotten out of holding on to these and telling myself these really disempowering stories for so long, and then finding now what's also true about that? What's also true about the fact that I'm telling myself this, or what's also true about myself, regardless of that story? Is it true that I don't know if I'm good enough because I've never done it before? Or is it also true that there might be things wrong with me, but that doesn't, they're not necessarily those things that are quote unquote wrong aren't who I am. Or there might be, the truth is, I don't know if I'm ever going to be loved in the way that I want to be loved, but there are people out there that probably thought the same thing and then found love. Like we can find ways of being creative with upgrading to a perspective, a quote unquote truth that actually feels truthful and a step up.
Something I want to highlight too is a big question people have for me is how did you develop your intuition? And it was through giving myself permission to be open to new perspectives. And that's essentially what we're doing with this exercise. When you can free yourself from gripping onto one singular idea of you, and you can just begin to open yourself up to new possibilities of how you think about you, how you feel about you in the world around you, you are letting in new insight. And that's what intuition is. You have to be open to receiving new perspectives because that's how your spirit guides are going to talk to you. They're going to question every single one of your belief systems. I think a misconception that people have is you get in front of your spirit guides and they just give you all the answers. That was not my experience and it still isn't. They don't give me answers for shit.
Hmm.
They just offer me new perspectives. When I sit there and I complain about how things are not working for me, they go, well, where are you not taking advantage of opportunities that are available to you? They don't tell me what the opportunities are, but they put that out there. And I'm forced to really look at it and I'm forced to say, okay, where am I not taking advantages of opportunities being presented to me? So just really wanted to put that out there because I think if you're listening to this, maybe that's something that you want to start to develop is your connection to your own inner wisdom. And this is how you do it. And I would
Hmm.
also love if we could highlight the difference, because you touched on this briefly, but I just want to come back to it. Highlight the difference between compassionate self-forgiveness, which is what we're talking about, and the difference between that and like positive thinking, positive mantras, or spiritual bypassing.
Yeah. Or call it, wrapping it in a bow and calling it self-love.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that those approaches, the think positive, the working on your mindset, the just love yourself method is really just telling us that we have to stop thinking certain thoughts and only think and believe positive ones. And we've all been there. We've all been in a situation where we notice that we're thinking negatively. We didn't try to think negatively, it just happened. Right? Thoughts just happen. We're looking in the mirror and our eyes zoom in on that part of our body that we don't like. And then it's like, oh, like that doesn't look good. And then we're like, crap, but I told myself I was going to be more self-loving. I told myself I wasn't going to be so mean to myself or critical of myself, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're just in a position where we feel like we're doing it wrong. And that becomes more fuel to the shame fire of now not only do I feel bad about what I see or what I'm doing, but I also feel bad about the fact that I'm still feeling bad about it, you know? And it's like there's nowhere to go from there, really. It's like either I don't have the thought or I do, but I'm not in control of that 100% of the time. And I'm also not going to be in control of whether or not I'm going to be able to believe a better thought about myself in that moment. Like I could look at myself in the mirror, see something I don't like, have an immediate thought about how I don't like how it looks and that it looks ugly and whatever, and then try to tell myself, no, I'm beautiful and this doesn't matter and no one's going to be looking at that anyways, whatever. And that's not going to resonate sometimes, and sometimes it will. Sometimes just telling ourselves a new story feels good or allows us to kind of move forward with this higher perspective and we can just like, move on. But sometimes it's just going to be like, I'm trying to tell myself this thing and it's not working. I'm trying to upgrade my perspective to make it so that I don't care about what other people are going to think, or make it so that this thing that I'm worried about actually doesn't feel like a big deal, or what actually feel like I am beautiful or whatever it is, but I can't believe it. I feel like I'm doing it wrong, is really what we're going to experience in that moment. And so, what we're talking about with the compassionate self forgiveness piece is really the bridge of what I'm thinking, what I'm believing makes sense. Like, I understand why I'm telling myself that looks ugly, or why I'm telling myself that other people are going to judge it, or why I'm telling myself that I did something wrong or that I'm ugly or whatever. Like, it makes sense given the world I grew up in and the conditioning that I've been exposed to. It makes sense given that I've had this strategy that I've relied on a lot in my life that has taught me that if I make something wrong and I beat myself up over it, then I'm going to do something to change it. It's going to be motivating to get myself to an outcome that feels better. And so it makes sense why I'm being hard on myself, and I can forgive myself for having that thought or for believing that this is ugly or for believing that I don't look good or whatever. And then through that forgiveness, then we're going to feel like we can access a perspective that isn't just that black or white, like I'm ugly, it's not ugly, or I feel gross, I'm beautiful. Like it's not trying to jump from one extreme to the other. It's just upgrading to something that feels accessible and just as true, if not even more true than that original story that you were telling yourself that it's ugly. And that can look like I forgive myself for believing that my stomach sticking out, in this dress looks ugly. The truth is, there might be people that think it looks ugly, and there might be people who are never, ever even going to notice that it's there. And the people that think that it's ugly are people that wouldn't let themselves see that or would be disgusted in themselves if they have that. And that's because of their conditioning and everything that they grew up around and everything that the expectation that they hold themselves to. And as sad as that is, and as much as it would be really uncomfortable for me to be the target of that, it really has nothing to do with me. And the truth is, my stomach looks like this right now, and I can either make it so wrong that I can't think about anything else and not be able to enjoy my time going out, or I can just leave it at, I really like the way that this dress looks, and it might not look exactly how I want it to look on me, but it is enough. And some people might love it and some people might not. And maybe that's the only perspective that we can upgrade to, but at least it feels better than this is ugly and everyone's going to judge me.
And if I'm compassionate and I forgive myself, will I become complacent?
Mm.
And will I no longer be able to work as hard and achieve all of the things that I want to using a different method of being nice to myself when I was mean to myself, I accomplished a lot.
Yeah, that's a legitimate concern. If we've only ever seen ourselves put action into something from this place of judgment and resistance and desiring to escape where we are, then it's safe to assume that if we're just okay with it, if we've accepted it, if we're more at peace with ourselves in any present moment, then there's not going to be any fuel to get anywhere. That we're just going to become complacent. We'll stop going to the gym, or we'll just veg out on the couch and eat a bag of chips every day, or we won't show up to create some passion project or to work on our business or to put ourselves out there for dating or whatever it is because we've just come into this place of, well, it's fine. I don't care. I'm okay where I'm at. And that's fair enough to assume. But I want to invite people to think about times in their lives where they took action on something from a peaceful place inside of themselves. Has there ever been an experience in your life where you took action on something, you chased something, you created something, you changed something, and it was coming from this place of feeling at peace or feeling excited or just being present in where you were and being kind of unattached in a way, but just like being like, I want this, or this feels good to do this right now. It feels good to go to the gym, or it feels good to take time out of my day to sit down and journal out some ideas for a passion project that I have, or it feels good to send that email to someone or whatever, where you took action on something and it wasn't coming from that place of, oh, if I don't do this, then XYZ, I'm a bad person, I'm going to fail, and something's wrong with me, and I'm going to be ugly, and I'm going to hate myself, or whatever. And if you can find evidence in your life that you've taken action from a place of inner peace, of self-love, of just feeling okay with where you were in that moment, then that's evidence to support that you don't need that negative, self-deprecating self-talk in order to motivate action. Action can come from an entirely different place.
Something my guides are highlighting is efficiency.
Hmm.
Efficiency comes from an open channel, a loving channel. And I can speak to this firsthand when I'm trying desperately to fight and to control and to force inside of my business. I make no leeway. And I finally give myself a chance to relax, go for a walk. An idea pops in that moves the needle tenfold. That's the way intuition works. And the universe wants to give you what you want. But if you don't give yourself a chance to receive that insight, then you're constantly going to feel like you're forcing something on your own. And so, in a way, I would argue that being compassionate with yourself, being gentle with yourself, facilitates efficiency and moves the needle forward in a way that you can't on your own from a place of self loathing, self rejection, and constantly being harsh on yourself in order to be productive.
Mhm.
We don't
Yeah, well,
understand it that way or see it that way, but I've witnessed it.
me too. That urgency to escape where we are from that place of self-hatred and judgment puts us into this like fight or flighty state where it's like we're trying to control, we're trying to escape, we're manipulating things outside of us to try to get somewhere else because we're not okay where we are. And we're gonna miss so much when we're in that place.
Yeah.
We're gonna be so hyper focused on one way, one
Yes.
thing, that we're not gonna see that there's actually something over here that would work better, or something over here that would feel better, or something over here that would last longer, or something over here that would get us what we actually want and not this thing that we think that we want. And when we are approaching life and everything from a more compassionate and self-forgiving approach, then inevitably we're going to feel more patient. We're going to feel more safe in the present moment, in any given moment. We're not going to feel this urgency to escape where we are. We're going to still be motivated to move, but we're not going to feel the urgency to escape. And that's a huge difference. And when we're feeling motivated to move, but with the detachment to how fast we move or where we're moving to, but we're just allowing what feels good and what feels aligned to guide us in that direction. Like you're saying, we're going to have much more guidance. We're going to have much more insight. We're going to feel so much more um, guided in that process that it's going to be a lot more efficient than when we're just so focused on controlling and escaping where it is that we're at currently.
What's the difference between compassionately forgiving you, like yourself, and compassionately forgiving another?
It's interesting because on the surface, I think people might have a easier time forgiving other people than they would have forgiving themselves. And that's circumstantially dependent as well, depending on what we're forgiving in ourselves and in them for sure. But I think that when we have an ability to find compassion for one, we just look for compassion and a compassionate lens in the other. And I think it can work either way. If we are dedicated to being more compassionate with ourselves and really understanding why we are the way we are, why we do what we do, why we don't do what we don't do, et cetera, et cetera. And we can meet ourselves in that with acceptance, where it's like, I can see why I'm like this, and it's okay that I've been like this. I might want to change how I'm being, but it's okay that I've been this way. I can understand it. It's easier to see that in someone else's behavior. When someone is acting really angry one day and they're being a little bit short and they make some rude comments and whatever, rather than getting caught up in like, what the fuck is wrong with them? And they need to like calm down and they need to get their shit together. It's like, oh, I know what happens to cause me to be like that. I know what has to be happening inside of me to be in a place where I would make rude comments to people or where I would be short or where I would project and be angry. And so therefore I can see that the place that they're coming from right now is like they're not feeling good. There's something going on internally that is creating this experience for them where they would even be put in a position to do what they're doing. And that compassionate lens of seeing them is a gift to you yourself, because then you're just not going to be so attached to other people not doing what they're doing or doing what they're not doing and trying to control what's not in your control outside of you. But it's a gift to them because now they're allowed to be in their process rather than them having feedback from the outside that what they're doing is wrong and needs to change in order for everything to be okay. It's like, no, what you're doing, where you're at is okay. It's representative of what's happening inside of you, and that's what's happening right now. And that's okay. And maybe that person could work on being kinder, or that person could work on not just falling asleep inside of their projections and being really rude, and could be more self-controlling in that way, and work on not letting their inner world influence the people outside of them as much. That could be something that they work on if it's important to them, but they're going to be much more effective at working on that if they're not feeling ashamed of it. And that's the gift that we offer people through our own compassionate lens and our ability to meet them where they're at. And we get better at that the more that we practice being there for ourselves. And when we get upset, or when we yell at someone, or when we tell ourselves we're going to do something and we don't do it, if we can practice self-compassion for ourselves in that, finding it for people comes easier. And then when we can find it for other people, doing it for ourselves becomes easier.
When you can compassionately forgive your judgment of another, you're also unloading that off of your own back. And we are not giving a pass to anyone that does a wrongdoing that's causing you pain. Their actions are not being forgiven, but your thoughts and opinions about their actions are being shifted in perspective that might facilitate more peace inside of you.
Mhm.
So you can still create a boundary with people. You can still uphold a certain set of expectations from them, or walk away from them, or disallow any actions to continue. And at the same time, you are forgiving whatever thoughts you might have held around why they behave that way, and access more compassion inside of your own state of being in relation to your thoughts about them, because
Yeah,
ultimately you might not really know why they're behaving a certain way, but it's your judgments about why, or your interpretations about why, that might be creating your suffering.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have reality and then we have our experience of reality. And we can't control reality. And we try to through withholding forgiveness a lot of the time. Like someone did something to me And the way that I'm going to try to control it from happening is to make it wrong and to withhold my forgiveness and to hold on to the idea that it can't happen, it shouldn't have happened, which is arguing with reality. And that's always going to hurt. Anytime that we're arguing with reality, we're going to suffer 100% of the time. And so when it comes to forgiving someone for some pain that they caused you, that can be really, it can feel impossible because there's a part of us that is going to be so attached to making sure that we never have to experience that pain again. And that's our strategy,
Or that they're
is
held
withholding
accountable.
forgiveness. That's right.
Yeah.
But there's absolutely a world that exists, like you were saying, where we hold a boundary, we communicate our expectations, we disallow something from happening again, and we do everything that we can do to try to control that future outcome and still release our war with reality by forgiving what did happen because we can't control that. And we can forgive what happened by, like you said, releasing our stories about why it happened and finding that compassionate lens that says, it's not because they're a bad person, or it's not because I deserved it, or it didn't happen because XYZ. It happened, and maybe I'll never know why. Maybe it happened because hurt people. Maybe it happened because there was a big misunderstanding. Like there's so many different things that we could plug in here, obviously, depending on the circumstance. But if you can find a perspective on what happened and why it happened, that lends itself to being more understanding and more compassionate, then the peace that you have available to access from that is going to be productive at supporting the future outcome that you want. It's not going to be counterproductive to preventing what you don't want from happening.
If you were to quickly explain how to incorporate a compassionate self-forgiveness practice into someone's life, what would that look like and how might someone get started?
Mhm. Someone first needs to be aware enough of the stories that they're telling themselves. And the process that I love to use for identifying what are we telling ourselves about ourselves and about reality is to first just identify what is the feeling that I have about this. What is the feeling? Is it that I feel embarrassed? Do I feel sad? Do I feel angry? Do I feel frustrated? And then whatever that feeling is, ask yourself, what would I have to be thinking and believing about this in order to feel that feeling? Frustrated, embarrassed, shamed, sad, stressed, whatever it was. So if the situation is that you had an outburst at work and you're beating yourself up over it, you're having a really hard time being self-compassionate, and you've just been spewing in your own self-criticism, like, why did I do that? I'm gonna lose my job. Oh my God, I'm terrible. Like, how could I let myself lose my shit like that? Then identify what you're feeling about it. You're feeling regret. You're feeling embarrassed. You're feeling scared. What would I have to be thinking and believing about the situation in order to feel embarrassed? I'd have to be believing that I did something wrong. I shouldn't have had that outburst, that I hurt other people because of it, might be another one. And then now we would just explore those, trying to see, is there a more compassionate perspective on this belief that also feels true? So if it was that I shouldn't have done that, we'll take that one for an example. I shouldn't have had that outburst at work. Is there a more compassionate perspective to that? Is it that had I known how to handle my feelings and what was going on in my personal life at that time better, then I probably could have prevented that outburst at work. But the fact that I had the outburst means that I didn't know how to manage what was happening inside of me at the time. And it came out that way. And that's unfortunate, but it's understandable. The perspective around um, that I hurt other people by doing it, we might look at, first of all, is it true that I did? Can I know without a shadow of a doubt that me having that outburst hurt other people? And then we can start to explore like funny perspectives of that. Like, did it just give people something funny to talk about in the office that day where they shared a little laugh and they're like, what's going on with Kelly? Like she's being a bit of a bitch today, isn't she? And they bonded over that and had a laugh about it. And how do we know that that didn't add more to their day than it took away? Right. And that might be hard to hold on to that perspective, but I invite you to look for it anyways, just to be creative with what are perspectives that I'm not seeing. But ultimately what we're looking to do here is just look at what am I feeling about the situation? What would I have to be believing about the situation in order to feel this way? And then is there a different perspective to this that feels more compassionate, that is understanding things from a more holistic standpoint rather than that very zoomed in, self-critical, self-hatred type of perspective? And then can I try that on and tweak it and play with it until it feels more peaceful inside of me?
Kelly just took you through a process of really reflecting on something in a very deep way, which we don't typically do. And when we can reflect on something and open up to new perspectives, it gives us access to a more neutral way of showing up inside of it that then extends to the next time too, where this is more than likely a pattern that is probably going to show up again in some future incident. And you're more likely to recognize it in the moment and shift the way that you're reacting when you've had this time to reflect already. Whereas if you don't take the time to do that, you're more likely to revert back into your reactive pattern, and the whole thing is going to play out again in exactly the same way, regardless of how much you guilt trip yourself and shame yourself for having done it previously. It's really how we not only access acceptance, but we free ourselves from disempowering patterns.
And I understand that it's hard to buy into this stuff right away because one, it takes effort, two, it feels uncomfortable, three, it's just like, the fears around, well, if I do this, if I do learn how to be more compassionate with myself, am I going to be stagnant? Am I not going to take action on things? Am I going to be judged as arrogant or whatever it is? There's a lot of justification that's totally valid that turns people away from making this a priority. But if there's something about this idea that resonates with you, and you can understand through our conversation that there's something valuable about adopting more self-compassion, and there's something that you see is available to you in what we're saying that would be really meaningful for you and you think would be worthwhile to you if that became your reality, then I invite you to explore it and to actually dedicate yourself to seeing, how do I experience my life differently when I have committed to being more self-compassionate? And just look for what benefits come from that. Do you feel more at peace? Do you let things go easier rather than ruminating on them and wasting all of your time and energy ruminating on things that happened? Are you more creative? Do you take more action? Does the action that you take not exhaust you as much? There are so many potential outcomes that can come from shifting the way that you are experiencing yourself on a day-to-day basis. And my experience of this and my experience watching so many other people go through this process is that it is so addicting because as soon as you see the benefit and you feel the benefit of having adopted this as a regular way of being in your life, you're like, why would I be anything else? Why would I ever like go back to treating myself any differently? Because life is just so much better when this is how I'm treating myself. And life is so much more efficient and effective and joyful and aligned with what I want when this is how I'm choosing to be with myself.
Yeah. It becomes your new normal.
Yeah,
And then
it
you just
does.
feel better.
Yeah. And then you want everyone else to do it too.
Yeah. And then you start to recognize when they're not or where they're not. And it's almost like seeing a past version of yourself
Right.
being reflected back to you. And it's like, I can't believe I used to operate that way. I can't believe I used to say that about myself or show up in that way, behave that way. And it's pretty eye-opening.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love like having like introducing people to self-compassion through like me offering them a compassionate perspective that they were not expecting. It's so fun when someone is like, I know I shouldn't be thinking that. And then I'm like, no, 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 you should. Like, it makes sense why you're thinking that. And based on
It's like a deer in the
XYZ,
headlights.
yeah, they're like, oh,
They're like, wait, what?
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Like they almost like I don't think it gets in there quite the first time because they're like, what is she talking about? But there's something about it, I think, that people are like, that felt good to hear that, right?
When you can see different perspectives that are just as true as the one that you've been believing, it's like, oh my God, wait, then why am I believing this again?
Right.
And it just, your whole world opens up. You start to think about things differently. You start to see new avenues that you couldn't see before, and you start to elevate your own consciousness. Like
Yes.
it's the gateway to expansion.
It is the gateway to expansion and to joy and to
Yeah.
just everything that feels good in this life. I think there's such a low ceiling to how good life can get if we're not practicing self-compassion regularly.
Let's end on that.
Yes, mic drop. Mic
Yeah.
drop.
Is there anything else that you want to add before we go?
I think that's it.
Cool. I think so too.
Good.
Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us for this compassionate self-forgiveness conversation. And we'll see you next time.